Hello and welcome to Africa Update this week on Trust TV, Ricky from our studios in Nigeria. And it's been a very, very lovely week. Of course, you know, quite a few things have happened on the continent, and as usual, we will discuss them in full this week. To stay with us, the program continues. Welcome back. It's still Africa Update on Trust TV. I'm your host, Chiamaka Nwafor. Now, it's the year has started with elections again, and we started off with Uganda. And you know, it's Yoweri Museveni and the Bobby Wine thing. You know, it's happened over time, and you know how that went with Yoweri Museveni winning the election for the 7th time, extending his 40-year rule. Now, let's look at this report from DW. Now that he has won, what are the people saying?
Supporters celebrated on the streets of the capital, Kampala, after the country's electoral commission declared a victory for the 81-year-old leader. Official results gave him more than 70% of the vote in an election marred by violence and an internet shutdown. Museveni's main rival, Bobby Wine, has rejected the result.
Well, that's a very, telling us basically what happened over there. He's won that election with about 71 point something percent of the vote, quite a very large majority of that vote. And we see the people on that video similarly rejoicing about the fact that, you know, he's won the election. Now, joining me from Uganda is Michael Aboneka. He's a human rights advocate, and he was going to be talking to us and telling us, you know, on ground, what's happened and what's currently happening in Uganda. Thank you for joining us on the program today.
Thank you for having me. It's already evening, you know, and thank you for having me. It's great to be on this TV show, and I hope that we can have a great conversation. And yes, so what's on the ground is that usually after elections and someone has won with 71.6%, you expect either a weekly celebration or a monthly celebration or a yearly celebration. But what we have is a somber mood, and looks like, you know, there's been a joke going around that it looks like we've lost someone as a country. And actually the mood is really somber because as I speak now, over 30 Ugandans have died because of violence orchestrated by the military. There's a lot of violence during elections. The deputy president of the National Unity Party, that is the Bobby Wine, deputy president of Uganda, as I speak now, he was arrested and he has been charged with terrorism today. And yet, the police and the army went to his home and shot over 10 people dead. But then they are accusing him of terrorism. You can imagine. It's really very disturbing. The other point is that the opposition claimed there was massive rigging, and some have already been petitioned court for recounting and arrest. Others have outrightly rejected the results. They were tampering with ballots, and then the machines did not work because ideally we're going to find out how many people came to vote. And this election is the worst, most attended. Less than 50. The Electoral Commission says 50% of people turned out, which is the worst in the entire election cycle. People do not turn up to vote because of various reasons. Either they are tired of the system or they know that their votes won't matter. 2 presidential candidates did not pick their certificates, you know, from the Electoral Commission during the day of announcement of results because they did not believe that the results really are a true expression of the people's will. So the opposition, especially Bobby Wine and his party, have said no. We don't agree to these results and we won't take them. And also he says he won't go to court because courts have not shown to show justice. They are not always on the side of the justice. They just rubber stamp and validate the election of what he considered to be something that they won't take up this time around. But there has been an opposition lead, one of the presidential candidates who has filed a petition. We are yet to see how that goes. And remember, this petition was filed at the time when our Chief Justice has retired. So what happened 2 days ago, the president quickly appoints the Deputy Chief Justice as the Chief Justice so that he hears the petition against himself. So one of the things we are wondering, and the discussions if you check online that have been engaging on the public, is that how impartial and objective is the Chief Justice going to be when the person who has hurriedly appointed him is the respondent in the petition. So there's a whole somber mood about that. But the other point is that there was internet shutdown. Even right now, the internet is throttled, but also rationed. We cannot access social media. You can't access Facebook. You can't access social media, WhatsApp, unless you're using VPNs. And the Communications Commission of the government keeps coming every day to say, we're going also to come and break into your VPNs. So it looks like an election is a war. It's not it doesn't show the will of the people. People are supposed to be happy with what they voted for and what they elected for. But unfortunately, this is a sad moment. Internet is shut down, they're throttling. Myself, another advocate on Monday this week, we filed a case against the government and against the telecom companies for switching off internet because we believe that violates our rights, especially freedom of expression, access to information, and also democracy. It's the fact that it should be in the open and in the light. But if the government of President Museveni says that they're democratic, they live in the light, why do they switch off internet? So those are some of the issues. But it's a somber mood in the country because every now and then there are more abductions happening. I think NOPE, the Bobi Wine's party, has had abductions of its, I think, three main deputy presidents. So you can imagine that the deputy president of the party is missing and others are being arraigned and charged with terrorism. And it's like business as usual. Okay. And then there's been a lot of violent talk about the military and the president himself saying he will crush anyone who tends to put up any context. And you see, in this country, you cannot even protest as an individual. Even as a single individual, you cannot protest because they're going to, the amount of artillery that is going to be used against you will be heavy. So now people have resorted, you know what? And we will not vote. And yesterday, we had the local government elections, and it was the worst of the turnover because people are tired of the violence. They no longer see the importance of going to the ballot. So it looks like people have given up. And unfortunately, it had to be Uganda to start the year like that in terms of elections. But someone is celebrating the win, but we don't see the win in our hearts. We don't see it on the street because a victory should be cascaded down to the people who voted that, yes, we voted for security, but our children are missing. Every now and then you have media stories every day of children missing or kids being picked. And the other day, the CDF, who's always on Twitter or who's always on X, he was saying that they are the ones who are in charge, who are involved in arresting the so-called, he calls them Bobi Wine's hooligans, but also and also the killings. He is saying it blatantly on X. And we need to hold such people accountable. Okay. So that's the scenario back here in Uganda.
All right, it's quite very, with what you've said, it seems quite a very sad situation over in Uganda. But you've mentioned quite a few things, and I'd like for us to just go through and go over them. Now, one of the things that you talked about is that the elections where the alleged, irregularities and, discrepancies and bad voter turnout and whatnot in that election. Now, in some countries, when elections are happening, we have the election observers, the EUs, and all those other people come around. Were these people on ground, and do they equally agree with your with this report that the elections were actually was what to use, not straightforward? There were lots of rigging involved in the election, according to what Bobi Wine is saying, actually.
Interestingly, the AU observation mission was here with 3 observers, and prior to the elections, a number of civil society organizations were suspended. They just write to you a letter and say, your activities are suspended because we suspect you're dealing with things that are subversive. And most of those organizations are the ones that have been doing some bit of citizen observation. And I want to believe, and I also believe as a governance expert, that there's no better election observation than the one that is done by the citizens themselves. The AU was here and a few observers, and I am sure there are not even more than 10 accredited organizations in Uganda that were accredited to observe the elections. That tells you something really bad. So most of the reports, actually we have not seen the reports. They just issued statements. We note with concern that the voting delayed across the country. Voting delayed almost starting around 11 a.m. and midday. And apart from those that were not ignored, the biometrics verification machines did not even work after spending over 300 billion Ugandan shillings, which is almost like 10 million US dollar. You can imagine, wasted. And also there was a lot of critiquing by and board staffing by the Electoral Commission officials themselves in some polling stations, including I think the one where the president voted from. You had more votes than the registered voters. So a lot of anomalies, which actually the observers do not point out. And these are coming out now when people are having some bit of internet and people are putting up their evidence. I know some young people in Uganda that are collecting all these declaration forms and putting things online. So, and then there's also the bigger question of the results that the Electoral Commission was reading at the National Talent Center. Where was it getting it from? Because ideally you're supposed to say, according to polling station X, according to district X, these are the results. But the Electoral Commission just announces, according to what we have now, we have so far 10 million votes that have come, and the Bob Wine has gotten 24, and President Museveni has gotten 71. But I asked him, where are these coming from? And he couldn't answer that question. And therein is the issue, that public trust is key. The whole organization of the election, I didn't see the observers talk about it. There's no voter education until towards the machines were procured in December. You can imagine that, that's when they arrived in December and November. There wasn't training as such for the officials to use them. So there's a whole thing of everything was done in a haste. Even the law about the regulation about the machines was passed in December by a minister who was also going to run as an MP, who was actually made it. So it's a bit of the observers are not being honest, really. They're not being honest. And if you want to know exactly what happened in Uganda, ask a Ugandan.
All right. Now let's talk about something quite important, which is the fact that he has come to run for a seventh time and now has won the presidency for the seventh time. What exactly are the Ugandans doing, and what exactly is the parliament doing? Because I believe this is a constitutional issue to sort of stop these from happening, reduce this long-term monarchical rule, though democratically entering, but it's actually a monarchy of some sort where someone is still on power for a very long time. And if we understand correctly, that your military head is his son, and then I think he made his daughter, I think the governor of the finance or something. I'm not so certain of that information, but he's putting family members. It seems like it's not the family hereditary kind of politics that's been run in Uganda. But what could actually be done to stem this, to stop this? And do you think that with the situation on ground, do you think the military is likely to tap into the cool, air that's moving around the African continent?
Thank you very much. Let me start with the correction. I think his daughter was never, I know it made around social media across the world, his daughter was never appointed the governor of Bank of Uganda, but his son, yes, he's the CDF, he's the Commander of Defense Forces. His wife is the Minister of Education. His son-in-law is the presidential advisor. Another son-in-law, he sits on the University Council of Makerere, and other things, so on and so forth. But the point is that we had constitutional safeguards. In 2005, we had term limits still in our constitution, but they were removed in 2005, and money exchanged hands in Parliament, so they removed that safeguard. In 2017, they removed the age limit, the only safeguard that we are left with. And therefore, once they removed the age limit, they paved the way for the incumbents to run again. So as it stands, the constitution was wrecked because that was not the decision of the majority of Ugandans. The framers of the constitution understood that the president has so much powers, therefore the president needs to transit every 5 years or at least 10 years maximum. Now, that is the original prescription of our constitution, that the president can have all these powers, but guys, just hang on, it's just 10 years. But now that those are moved, they are no longer in our constitution. So we are fighting a hard battle saying that, and we have back our term limits at least. So we're starting the conversation of like, okay, even if you're 80, you can only do maximum 10 years. You know, so to say, okay, we need all of them back. We need to have term limits and we have to have age limits. And even the conversation is starting to say we need term limits for the members of parliament, because then these are the people who bring problems, because these are the guys who stand and choose. But also the fallacy of representative democracy, because the MPs went in that house and voted in 2017 that yes, the people of Uganda and my vote.
All right, we're going to go on a short break, and when we return, the conversation continues on Africa Update. Welcome back to Africa Update here on Trust TV. Now, we've been talking with a human rights advocate in Uganda about the elections that took place in the East African country. And just before the break, Michael, you were telling us about, the constitution and how things work and how we've come to this place whereby Yoweri Museveni is now the president for a servant term.
Yes, and until he decides not to run, or until he's make a call, he will run as many times as he wants, because there's no longer safeguard, because we lifted the term limits, we lifted the age limit. So the only way we need to do is return those. But then the question is, which parliament is going to return that? Because even parliament has become a house of cards, has become a transactional house, because members of parliament, we know that have been receiving monies to be able to do this. So we are watching these 5 years to see how Uganda first of all transit, because like I've never seen any other president in my life apart from the current one. And so we hope that the transition can happen, and can happen probably within the legal framework. So we need to, so our zeal as Ugandans is that can we return the age limit and the term limit back to the constitution, and to limit the age to 75, and that's the maximum age, and also ensure that one serves twice, so that we reduce the power of the incumbency of long stay, because when people stay longer, everything becomes personalized, because then that kills state institutions, it kills the nation. So the nation is not where to be seen. You have the party and the president fused with the government, so you can't tell which is which. So I think that it is time for Uganda to really review its status and say we need to get back the constitutionalism that our forefathers were envisaging, because then we will continue in problems. Because the parliament is supposed to play a bigger role, but it is just a house of cards, like I told you. They are not solid. The speaker is always voting for the president. I mean, campaigning for the president the entire campaign period, because she's a member of the Central Executive Committee of the ruling party. So even the deputy, they were there campaigning for the president. So how do you expect them to stir a house objectively when they are busy campaigning for a president. And she even said that she's going to make sure that Parliament passes laws that are pro-party. Then what does that leave the rest of us who are not probably pro-party and we are pro-Uganda? So we really have a big problem, even with the Parliament. And I hope that Ugandans find all means to sort this mess.
Okay. Now, one of the major components of the beautiful thing of the African continent is the youth population. The most of the population of Africa is between the ages of 18 to, well, in some countries, say 35, or some countries say 50 as youth. Now, with the youth population, which I believe is equally translates in Uganda, why haven't we seen, a turn of events, like we see in some other countries? Over in Kenya, we saw the way they didn't allow for this to happen. They stood up in their own way. They fought. Same thing over in Tanzania. We've seen the movement in the whole East African corridor taking place. Why hasn't this translated in Uganda as well? To say we want a move. I'm not saying that, you're worried maybe they didn't win the elections, but somehow maybe 71% seems quite a large number for a very much youth-populated country.
Unfortunately, the young people are the ones, most of them are the ones who have been, I don't know if they've been doing it genuinely or for getting money and stuff. They've been leading campaigns, the artists, everyone made an association of the MCs, an association of the guys who announced death announcements. Everyone was creating an association. The other day it was the TikTokers and what. Everyone was going before the ruling party to receive a token, I think, for the campaign. So the youth have been reduced to tokenism, that the only way out is to survive through tokens and by begging the powers that be. So when you use poverty as a tool of suppression and oppression, people are left with no choice but to beg and maintain the status quo. That's one. Two, there are no spaces for engagement. In Uganda, you cannot even stage your one-person demonstration. So, beat an election, beat any civic exercise, the army is always deployed. And the President Museveni's son keeps threatening people that we are going to kill you, we're going to shoot you if you do otherwise. So what do, like the thing is, what do you want Ugandans to do? It's a common thing here. So what Ugandans do is to just keep back and hopefully pray, because even the religious leaders are in bed with the government. But that someone shouldn't take Ugandans for granted. The time will come when, and it's now manifesting when Ugandans are saying enough is enough. There are those who are betraying. It is true the young people are many, but the point is that because of the leadership style, make young people poor, make them dependent, so that they have no choice but work with the system. So there are not so many that can push back, and people are in a state of fear, are in a state of self-censorship, be it media, be it any individuals. So in self-preservation, some of us are activists. We've done a lot of cases in court for activism and on the streets. And, we're outgrowing that. And now I do a lot of advocacy online and online and on TV and other places. So in courts, because I'm an advocate for 10 years, because there is no space, there's no physical space. The digital space is also going away because people are being arrested for abusing the first family, and people are charged with the Computer Misuse Act. The law we are actually also challenging, but then you have the son of the president saying, "I'm going to kill people, I'm going to do this," and no one touches him. So there's fear. There's no space anymore. There's no physical space. There's no digital space, and there's no intellectual space. So, in other words, and we had a report about 3-4 years ago that out of if they said 15% of the population of Ugandans are mad, then at least one out of the 14 people you find is mad. We can't live with all this stress and still have our mental health growing. So we have so many things we deal with as Ugandans. But like I said, everything has its own time. You never.
All right. We seem to have, lost Mr. Aboneka there, and unfortunately we'll need to wrap up the program at that time. But he's made certain clarifications in case you, came across that story that the President Yoweri Museveni made his daughter the president of the finance or central bank. He's clarified that that's not the case so far. Now, Mr. Aboneka, just before we let you go, in 30 seconds, if you can, just tell us, what is the way forward for Uganda, especially as regards the next cycle in 5 years' time?
We need to plan for transition. The army needs to let the civilians take over government. We need to make sure institutions are working. Ugandans must demand for accountability. They must demand for what is theirs. We need to put a hard time on parliament to do its job. We need to make sure that we get jobs, that the economy of the country is moving. And we should stop disruptions of shutting down the internet and all that kind of stuff in the name of preserving peace. It doesn't work. It's already we are coming to the 22nd century, and we are behaving as though we are in the 14th one. So we need to move forward as a country and ensure that everyone is benefiting than just a few that.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Aboneka, for sharing your insights with us on the Ugandan situation.
Thank you for having me.
And that's it for Africa Update this week. We've been talking about the Ugandan elections, what's happening on ground, and we had Michael Aboneka from that country giving us insights to the happenings in the East African country. And that's it for Africa Update this week. Same time, same place next week. I've been your host, Chiamaka Nwafor. Bye for now.